All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the briefing for Hurricane Sally. This is our first live webinar on this. We will do another tomorrow in addition to sending out emails as well. Got a little bit to talk about, obviously, since we're going to have some impacts from this. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, this is the 11 a.m. Update that was just put out just a few minutes ago. Not a lot of change overall. Sally did take a northward jog, as they were discussing on the call, and at this point it looks like it should begin to slowly drift north towards the southern Alabama coast and come ashore somewhere around Mobile during the morning hours tomorrow as a Category 1 hurricane before moving across southern Alabama and then eventually towards us. And as you can see, very slow as it comes across Alabama, and because of that, obviously, there's rainfall is going to be one of the primary concern. Heavy rain bands will move in as early as Wednesday. We could see some form later this afternoon and evening, but really looks like Wednesday, as the storm comes ashore tomorrow, we'll start to see a lot of the bands, especially affect us in the southwest. And we may see some as far north as the I-20 corridor. Some models suggesting that, but it's all a matter of timing. But nonetheless, this track, it's really starting to hone in on coming in somewhere in the Columbus, LaGrange area, at least entering the state about that point. Models are getting a little more consistent on that sometime Thursday evening. In terms of overall threat, obviously rainfall and flooding is increased with this, and we've got a lot of consistency in the models, with 5 to 7 inches along and north of the track itself, locally to 8. We actually have 8 in some of our actual forecasts now, or up to 8 inches. So that obviously is going to lead to a lot of flash flooding concerns and river flooding as well. Wind and tornadoes are still a threat, especially across the southwest part of our area, the Columbus area particularly, near the low itself as it's approaching, but also with any feeder bands. And those feeder bands that do extend north, even as far north as Atlanta Metro, do pose a low-end wind risk. And if we get a lot of saturated soils, that could obviously cause a problem with trees. But nonetheless, we're going to focus in on the rainfall threat primarily on this briefing. I'll let this load on your end. It'll take a second. This is the satellite view of Sally this morning, going into the early sunlight. And you can see a lot of the clouds and showers that are associated with it are streaming north and east away from the center. It's the general direction that the storm will end up taking. But so what you see outside now is actually associated with Sally itself. And so that moisture is moving into our region now, and will continue to do so over the next couple of days. Here's the current radar. I'll let it load on your end as well. In the heaviest bands remain to our south, but you can see a few showers forming across our region today, and that'll be the case generally. We may see some showers and storms come in off the Atlantic, and there may be associated with like sea breeze / Sally interaction, and that will, I-16 to Columbus, that region today. You may see a few feeder bands feeding in and out, but really as the storm starts to move ashore tomorrow, some of these feeder bands stream further north and east, we'll start to see that heavier rain move in. But becoming a lot more widespread Wednesday into Thursday night, and maybe as late as Friday morning is the primary time frame. So let's talk about rainfall. I'm going to show you a couple different models here and their heavy rainfall axis and how it varies. And the axes actually are going to trend with the low itself. The one on the upper left is the European model. You've all heard about the European model, and the bottom right one is the GFS. And both are pretty consistent in showing a heavy swath of rain just north of the track. And I don't have the actual track on here itself, but the track in both of these models, let me draw up in the pen. In the European, it was, whoops, let me go back, draw on the screen. Here we go. In the European, it was somewhere in here. And on the GFS, it was just along in here. And along and north of the actual center itself is where it puts the axis of heavy rainfall. And to the south, while it does have a lot of rain, not nearly as much. And so there's obviously going to be a sharp gradient between really the haves and the have-nots. And the northeast side of the track and the north side of the track is where it's putting a lot of the heaviest rainfall. And a lot of the models are pretty consistent with that. And you can see, too, in the European actually has a little bit more rainfall, higher end rainfall. But generally speaking, 4 to 6 is not uncommon in just about any model solution we look at. So that said, that is why our forecast is what it is, and with the higher rainfall totals. Right now, the track going in just north of Columbus and across central Georgia, that puts the axis of heaviest rainfall in the I-85 corridor, and you'll see it in our forecast in a minute. And again, the models are very consistent with at least 5+ inches generally along and north of that track itself. So obviously that's going to create some problems, especially as it's moving in. We'll see the heaviest rainfall occur in a pretty short period of time. This is an actual look at the at one model's radar reflectivity, and this is starting. Let me wait for the start period. This starts Wednesday night. This starts tonight after midnight, and you can see the storm in this particular model as it basically comes ashore a little further east in the actual forecast. Again, this is why I was not going to show this, but it's generally speaking showing you where the heaviest rain tends to be. And there's going to be rain east and south of the center, but you can see how top heavy the storm becomes as it's coming ashore. And so the northeastern quad is where a lot of this heavy rain is going to be, and that's why we have the rainfall axis where we do. This particular model has the track a little further south than the actual forecast, and so you could take this and then shift it north, and that's why we'll see what we see with our actual rainfall forecast. But nonetheless, this is kind of what we can expect. And the area east of the center, you can see some of the feeder bands that are feeding into it. Those will be the ones that we're concerned with on a tornado threat standpoint, and as well as stronger winds closer to the center itself. Not that there won't be some in some of the bands on the north side, but we'll see that a little bit more in the eastern and southern flanks, where there's a lot more scattered convection. And so, again, the tornado threat will be located further south. Wind, let's talk about the wind probabilities. This is from the Hurricane Center and the time of arrival. Obviously, we're talking after tonight into Wednesday, 2 a.m., so overnight tonight into tomorrow, with any feeder bands especially, is if we're going to see tropical storm force wind gusts, that would be when they occur. But generally speaking, winds of 20 to 30 are likely beginning this evening into the overnight and then continuing through Thursday, especially with any of those bands itself. Generally speaking, it's about a 10 to 30% chance of seeing tropical storm force wind gusts, not necessarily sustained, but wind gusts through the end of the week with Sally as it moves across. So we'll obviously not downplay that, but with wet soils and still leaves on trees, down trees will certainly be a concern, especially on the latter half as the low is moving across itself later Thursday evening into Friday morning. Rainfall totals, this is what's actually in our forecast, and you can see the swath of 6 to 8, generally 6 to 7, isolated 8, right in the I-85 corridor, as I was saying, with the actual surface low coming in somewhere between Columbus and LaGrange, and then tracking generally along and south of that in that orange band you see is generally speaking where the actual track of the low itself is. From, say, Columbus to Eatonton or so. And then the areas to the north of that is where the heaviest rainfall axis is. And that does put the Atlanta metro in the heaviest rain axis. And that'll be, generally speaking, Wednesday night into Thursday. And then Thursday night, as the low comes across itself, we'll see this come and accumulate over time. And that's certainly going to ramp up the flash flooding threat and accumulate with the track of the low itself. And so we'll have to watch that very closely from a flash flood standpoint, which will evolve into a river flood threat as well as we evolve through this storm into Friday morning. But widespread 4 to 6, amounts to 8 possible, particularly in the I-85 corridor. This total does run through Saturday morning. There is some lingering rain from Friday into Saturday, but obviously the heaviest amounts are going to be in front of that. prior to Saturday morning. The Weather Prediction Center does have a moderate risk, and this is similar to an SPC style where there's a probability of excessive rainfall, and that's rainfall exceeding flash flood thresholds. And you can see for Wednesday into Thursday morning, generally in the I-85 corridor with the approach of the system itself, slight risk outside of that, generally encompassing our almost entire area except for the far southeast. And so likely flash flooding threat ramps up again tomorrow. That parlays into Thursday, into Friday, and so starting Thursday morning into going into Friday morning, we extend that further north and east from Atlanta Metro northeast all the way to the state line of South Carolina, generally on the I-85 corridor. Again, flash flood risk pretty high north and east of that center and that track itself. River flooding, this will be updated as rainfall amounts become more confident, but river points in orange obviously have a higher probability of going into flood. If you want to check this website out, you can. I'll put it on here and stay up to date. You can click on the points and see some of the various model solutions from the models. But basically, it's a probability of exceedance, and we're picking generally around the middle range, but there are higher thresholds out there, and so the probability of getting some higher levels is certainly there, especially with those rainfall amounts we're talking. We are coordinating with the Southeast RFC, and we'll have additional rainfall forecast in their model output this afternoon. So we may have some updated information on various points if you're interested in any this afternoon that we can get information on. So if you have any questions on that, don't hesitate to call us later once we coordinate with them this afternoon. In terms of tornado potential, the SPC Wednesday evening into Thursday does have our southern counties in a marginal risk, and that is primarily associated with the low-end tornado risk, a 2% chance. Those will be with any feeder bands, as I was alluding to in some of that in that one model forecast I was showing you, with the feeder bands moving shore. So we'll obviously have to pay attention to that, and they will be very fast moving. And typical with tropical tornadoes, they spin up very quickly, they spin down very quickly. They're not usually on the ground very long. We saw that with Michael. We had tracks that were less than 2 miles. That means that they were on the ground for less than typically 5 minutes or that or less. And so they're very, very difficult to capture on radar and very difficult to warn on and get a lot of lead time on. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about tornadoes and tropical tornadoes particularly. But the primary concern will be with any feeder bands as those as the low starts to approach. So the key takeaways: the heavy rain and flash flooding are the primary concern for us, especially as we get into Thursday night and Wednesday into Thursday morning, and then Thursday night into Friday morning. During the overnight periods, we could continue to see heavy rain during the overnight, and especially when that low approaches. So we're talking about the potential for nighttime flash flooding and an overnight potential. Those are always higher risk, especially if there's anybody out driving at night, and flash flooding are the leading cause of fatalities for flooding at least. We do have a lower end risk for a few tornadoes down south. Again, I showed that a minute ago, and for some downed trees due to the higher winds and wet soil. So keep that in mind as well. But obviously the flash flooding threat and road washouts are going to be the primary concern that we see with the storm. Confidence, pretty high. It's 4. I almost picked 5 on this. I was very confident. And the only reason I didn't is there's still a little uncertainty in the exact track and the timing. Some models are a little faster in bringing the low in. Some are a little bit slower in moving it in. So some bring it in and clear us out by late Thursday. The actual forecast doesn't have it approaching us until late Thursday. So those things are what keep us from going very confident in the actual forecast itself. It's more of a timing and exact track forecast. So, but otherwise, we are very confident in a heavy axis of rainfall just north and east of the actual track itself. That we do have a lot of confidence in. And that is the last slide on the briefing. We will do another one tomorrow in addition to sending out an email this evening with updates from the Hurricane Center and as we update the rainfall forecast, we'll send those updates out to you as well. But the slides should be available to you, and we're going to record this and make this available on YouTube as well.